prepare the self-evaluation. But what I realized when I did that is that's the way that we learned more about our organization than we ever would have. And we used that self-evaluation document as a means to present to new staff or new members of our board detailed information to understand the workings of the agency. So it is really a valuable process. But I haven't involved in directly. But sitting next to me is Amin Alal from Algeria and a member of the HAQAA task force for HAQAA2. And he is an absolute expert. He's so good at this, he's even translated what we were talking about in English into French overnight. Amin, over to you to start the discussion.
Bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. J'espère que vous êtes bien remis de la belle soirée d'hier. Et pour ceux qui ont dansé, j'espère que vous êtes reposés. Mon anglais, chers collègues, je dirais entre guillemets, si je puis me permettre, est aussi mauvais que ton français. Donc là, on est match nul. Alors effectivement, ce matin, j'ai l'honneur et le plaisir de vous présenter d'une manière assez brève le travail qui est en train de se faire concernant la synthèse des évaluations des agences et des actions aussi d'accompagnement et d'appui concernant les structures s'occupant de l'assurance qualité rattachées à certains ministères pour certains pays. En fait, le travail s'inscrit dans les livrables prévus dans le projet HAQAA2 et il a concerné 8 agences. On va dire agences dans un premier temps. En fait, agences proprement dites, il y en a 5 et puis structures ministérielles s'occupant de l'assurance qualité, il y en a 3. En ce qui concerne les agences, celles qui ont été évaluées conformément au référentiel HAQAA2 sont l'agence du Mali, l'agence de l'Angola, l'agence de la Guinée, l'agence de la Mauritanie, l'agence de la République démocratique du Congo, ainsi que l'agence du Botswana. Pour les structures rattachées au ministère, le travail, en fait, n'a pas été un travail d'évaluation, puisqu'elles ne sont pas structurées en tant qu'agence et elles n'ont pas l'autorité ou les prérogatives pour faire des évaluations institutionnelles, même s'il y a eu des actions volontaires qui ont été faites. Donc, structures sont rattachées au ministère de l'Enseignement supérieur de la Côte d'Ivoire, au ministère de l'Enseignement supérieur de l'Algérie, et puis aussi au ministère de l'Enseignement supérieur du Malawi. J'ai dit tout à l'heure que le travail est en train d'être fait parce que une grande partie des rapports ont été déjà soumis et publiés, mais il nous en manque quelques-uns. Donc, en fait, les conclusions que je vais donner ne représentent que les rapports déjà publiés et soumis. Les démarches méthodologiques ont été presque similaires, sauf qu'en ce qui concerne l'évaluation, elle a été faite suivant toutes les références de l'HAQAA, tandis que pour les structures rattachées au ministère, c'était de l'appui et puis voir en fonction de certaines références ce qui est en train de se faire et ce qui risquerait par la suite, si les agences sont créées, risquerait de se faire. Donc pour les agences, il y avait là aussi, entre guillemets, obligation de respecter les exigences de la partie B et C du référentiel HAQAA, tandis que pour les visites de conseil et d'appui, il n'y avait pas, disons, d'obligation, c'était une évaluation partielle par rapport aux exigences du référentiel. La méthodologie qui a été suivie classique universel a consisté dans un premier temps par les structures elles-mêmes à faire une auto-évaluation, à produire un rapport et à l'envoyer aux experts. Les experts qui ont été désignés, c'était des teams de 3 personnes, 2 personnes africaines et une européenne. Bien sûr, dans la structure de l'équipe, on sait tous qu'il faut qu'il y ait à chaque fois un chef qui s'occupe de ça, un leader qui doit s'occuper de l'équipe. Le travail a consisté, bien sûr, à faire des entretiens, de l'observation aussi, et puis à la recherche de preuves, particulièrement en ce qui concerne l'évaluation des agences. Et puis, à la fin, ça s'est terminé pour ce qui a été fait par l'émission de rapports, donc l'émission de différents rapports qui sont en train d'être analysés, synthétisés, voir ce qui peut ressortir. Ceci dit, comme beaucoup de mes collègues ici présents en ont parlé hier, la première constatation, c'est que les situations sont souvent très différentes, pour différentes raisons, entre les structures, disons, de culture anglo-saxonne ou portugaise ou francophone. Les démarches ne sont pas les mêmes. Les aspects culturels, la qualité, ce n'est pas la même. On essaie bien sûr de faire en sorte de sortir les éléments qu'on retrouve d'une manière très fréquente, sachant que les agences elles-mêmes fonctionnent à des vitesses différentes. Alors, les premiers points de cette première synthèse qui n'est pas encore finalisée, et qui va l'être dans quelques semaines, les points les plus importants autour desquels s'articule cette synthèse et sur lesquels il y aura des recommandations qui seraient faites sont les suivants. Le premier point, c'est faire en sorte que l'indépendance de l'organisme menant à l'assurance qualité externe soit réelle et effective. Le deuxième point, il faudrait installer des actions, mais aussi des politiques concernant la transparence et la fourniture d'informations publiques sur l'agence, particulièrement en ce qui concerne les activités et bien sûr les résultats. Ces informations doivent être accessibles aux différentes parties prenantes. Une des questions qui revenait souvent concernait l'aspect financier, puisqu'on parle d'indépendance et d'autonomie. Comment assurer la viabilité financière des agences et comment mobiliser les ressources financières pour sa pérennité. On a fait aussi apparaître l'essentiel concernant la mise en place de politiques et d'activités pour le renforcement des capacités des personnels. Ça aussi, c'est un point dont on a parlé hier, qui revient très fréquemment, qui permet, là aussi, grâce à ce renforcement des capacités et aux différentes formations qui se feront, de garantir, bien sûr, avec la nécessité, on a parlé de viabilité financière, de garantir la pérennité des agences. Un aspect sur lequel on a retrouvé quelques défis à relever concerne l'implication de toutes les parties prenantes. Il est clair que pour des raisons culturelles, qu'on ne retrouve pas toujours l'implication, par exemple, des étudiants dans beaucoup de démarches, que ce soit bien sûr de la qualité, l'assurance qualité interne, mais aussi dans le cas de l'assurance qualité externe. Cette implication de toutes les parties prenantes est une nécessité pour l'engagement de tous les acteurs de l'enseignement supérieur. Cette démarche participative est la meilleure manière pour que toutes ces parties prenantes s'engagent à faire tirer l'enseignement dans le même sens, dans le but de mettre en place une qualité pérenne et durable. Mais aussi de les impliquer, même dans le développement méthodologique, tout ce qui concerne, on va dire, l'amélioration continue, aussi bien au niveau de l'agence, mais aussi dans la mise en œuvre de l'amélioration des référentiels. Donc, les impliquer, même en ce qui concerne les outils, les critères de l'assurance qualité. Voilà, je dis bien les premiers points. Vous aurez, j'espère, le plaisir à lire le rapport qui sera publié dans quelques semaines et qui fera sortir des éléments encore plus nombreux, pertinents, concernant cette opération qui fait suite à la même opération qui s'est déroulée, je vous le rappelle, dans le projet HAQAA2. Merci de votre attention.
Merci, Amin. But thank you very much. Colleagues, can I now open the floor to questions, contributions, thoughts to say, colleague here, and could everyone say who they are and where they're from, so that it's good to know the diversity of views and questions we're getting. Peter.
Thank you very much. Peter Okebukola from the National Universities Commission of Nigeria. I'd like to thank the presenter for the report. We look forward to having the full report, as I said, in a couple of days, maybe weeks. I particularly like the proposition on the involvement of students in quality assurance activities. After all, the target group for the quality assurance activities, or the major target group, will be the students. We're looking at the quality of graduates, and when you talk about quality of graduates, you're looking at the students being the precursor to that quality. So I'm sure I'm going to get a sense from the report on how that recommendation on the involvement of students will be like. But I'd like to share the experience of Nigeria. Our quality assurance agency, as our chair, Douglas Blackstock, said yesterday, we celebrated the 60th anniversary of the establishment of that organization as a quality assurance agency. 60 years, the oldest in the world. So what we do in response to this request for students being part of it, is that we have a whole department for students, student affairs, a whole department that any decision that will have to be taken regarding quality assurance must be processed, must have the input of that department. The department reaches out to students all over Nigeria through their umbrella organization. It's called the National Association of Nigerian Students, NANS. So I'm happy to report that we are more or less on track, but not to say that we don't have any room for improvement, but to share that experience that in Nigeria, we have in our quality assurance agency, a whole department for for quality assurance. But what we do not do is when we send teams to quality assure programs or the institutions in the universities to involve students, we do not do that. The reason being that we want integrity of the process. We want the experts in the discipline. We are going to accredit medical program or engineering or history. We get professors, full professors in the area to do the accreditation. This is just to share the experience from Nigeria. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. That's a really interesting contribution. And we might come back to that soon. I see hand right up at the back.
Okay. Bonjour, alors, c'est M. Keita de l'agence. J'attends que vous mettez les masques. OK. Monsieur Keita de l'Agence malienne d'assurance qualité de l'enseignement supérieur du Mali. Voilà, Amine, dans sa synthèse, a parlé des visites d'appui, d'évaluation. Moi, j'ai vu qu'il y a des agences qui ont candidaté pour des visites d'appui et d'autres agences pour une évaluation en bonne et due forme. Il n'a pas fait la différence. Pourquoi? Est-ce que c'est la même chose? C'est ça ma question. Deuxième question, il y a un pays qui n'a pas été évalué, qui avait candidaté, la RDC. Qu'en est-il? Voilà. C'est deux questions. Merci.
Merci, Abdelkader. Je n'ai pas fait la différence pour une raison très simple, c'est que on m'a demandé de faire une synthèse, en fait. Mais dans le rapport, il y aura la différence, un tableau, là où il y a eu visite d'appui pour une agence et là où il y a eu visite d'évaluation. Ça va apparaître. Le rapport sera beaucoup plus détaillé. Hein. Ce n'était pas l'objectif dans ce qu'on m'a demandé de présenter. En ce qui concerne la deuxième, je ne pourrais pas vous répondre parce que je peux vous dire en toute sincérité, l'information que j'ai, c'est que RDC, pour l'instant, il n'y a pas de rapport, mais je l'ai mis dans la liste. Hein. Donc, je ne pourrai pas vous répondre. Peut-être Elisabeth, c'est elle qui va vous répondre. Ça dépasse ma mission, le cas de ma mission.
Elizabeth, and then there's a colleague up here I'll come to next.
Just to answer the question, thank you so much. The DRC is still to be evaluated. My understanding is that they have completed the self-assessment and that the visit is being planned most likely in January. So this is still foreseen for HAQAA2. It was more a question of logistics and dates and confirming experts. But our understanding is that before the HAQAA2 officially closes, which will now be in mid-February, that all of the visits foreseen will have been completed and that we will have a richer report for Amin to produce.
Does that affect the timetable for the report? So when will we get the big gift of the report that we can all read?
Safely, I would say expect it by the beginning of February.
Okay, thanks. So look out for that in your email. Colleague right at the back with the blue shirts. Over to you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et moi, c'est professeur Kabiné Oularé de l'agence, l'Autorité nationale d'assurance qualité de la Guinée. Notre agence a été évaluée dans le cadre d'une visite d'appui, mais nous n'avons pas le rapport. Il y a eu un pré-rapport et nous n'avons aucune information sur la suite du processus d'évaluation. Merci.
We will try and find out today what the progress with that is and get back to you. I don't have any information on the detail of the individual reports. Colleague just here.
Merci beaucoup. Mohamed Amin Al-Hadas, président, excusez-moi, directeur exécutif de l'autorité mauritanienne d'assurance qualité de l'enseignement supérieur. Je vous remercie pour le rapport synthétisé qui a fait le brossage de la situation des visites d'évaluation et d'appui. Bon, mon ami Abdelkader Keita du Mali a fait la différence entre la visite d'appui et la visite qu'il a appelée en bonne et due forme. Mais je pense que la visite d'appui qui s'est passée en Mauritanie était vraiment en bonne et due forme. Et je ne voyais même pas de différence entre la visite d'appui et la visite en bonne et due forme. En toute honnêteté, j'ai mon rapport devant moi. Et j'ai la chance d'avoir deux membres du comité, le président ici présent, Sader Bakour, et Bakouche, excusez-moi, bon, j'ai mon collègue marocain Bakour, et Marie-Églantine. On était vraiment très honorés de les avoir et on était très chauffés. Et ce n'est pas du tout une visite d'appui simple. OK? Donc, pour ce qui est du reste, nous avons reçu le rapport à temps. Nous avons eu l'occasion, nous avons eu l'opportunité de faire des corrections factuelles qui sont vraiment très minimes. Nous l'avons ramené à temps et de notre côté, pas de problème. Merci.
Si je puis me permettre, hein, pour notre ami de la Guinée et de la Mauritanie, je vais commencer par vous. La différence entre ce type de visite, c'est en fait, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, qu'est-ce qu'on doit évaluer par rapport à la HAQAA. Une visite d'évaluation, c'est, sauf si une exigence, elle est exclue et doit être justifiée, concerne toutes les exigences du référentiel. C'est une visite d'évaluation, sauf exclusion justifiée. Tandis qu'une visite d'appui, c'est, on va dire, certaines parties et puis le conseil sur certaines autres parties de la HAQAA. Elle ne concerne pas toutes les parties, toutes les références des parties B et C. C'est ça la différence. Après, ceux qui sont sur le terrain, qui ont évalué, peuvent, en accord, par exemple, avec vous, de ce que j'ai compris, aller un peu plus loin dans le détail, hein, concernant différentes références. L'exclusion qui se fait à ce niveau-là ne doit pas être justifiée. On peut dire cette partie, pour l'instant, ne nous concerne pas. Une visite d'appui va donner justement beaucoup de conseils pour que l'agence puisse arriver à un niveau où elle va essayer de respecter toutes les références. En ce qui concerne nos amis de la Guinée, où en est le rapport, alors ça, le rapport, vous allez avoir, ce qui est sûr, vous allez l'avoir. Où est-ce qu'il en est? Je pense qu'il a été fait, hein, il existe. Pourquoi vous ne l'avez pas reçu, je ne sais pas. Hein, parce que moi, je travaille déjà sur des documents pour la synthèse. Mais pourquoi vous n'avez pas reçu, ça, je ne sais pas. Ça va venir, voilà. J'essaie de prendre en fonction des informations. Madame Kouchi, sur ces aspects-là, si vous voulez, a plus d'informations que moi. Merci. J'espère que j'ai répondu un peu à vos questionnements.
Just to clarify that all reports will be delivered. I think there's some that are still being finalized by the expert teams, but all remaining reports will be finalized in due course. So no worries.
For clarifying that, I think these are really important questions actually, because I'll tell you why. Many years ago, one of my colleagues visited the university, and they said, "It's very nice to receive you here. Could we ask about our review reports?" And I said, "Well, why? Is there an issue?" "Well, the visit happened 200 days ago and we haven't had a draft report." And then we discovered there was someone in the agency who was late with 3 reports. So this is a good quality check for us. And we'll just go and make sure that we've got reassurance that everything's on their way, and we'll get the reports out to you. It's important, though, that colleagues, if you're awaiting a report, we get it as soon as possible. I would hope that at some stage, though, colleagues who have had a visit, who've had a review, might reflect on some of their own experiences, not just of the review process, but what you found out about your own agency through that process. And anyone who's been involved in the visits, what you think were the interesting things you found. I saw some hands somewhere at the back, but they seem to have gone down. Just let me...
Je suis Lamine Gueye, secrétaire exécutif de l'ANAQ, l'Autorité nationale d'assurance qualité du Sénégal. Quand on regarde de près les 5 conclusions qui ont été tirées des visites et revues, on voit que les choses peuvent avancer quand il y a une prise de texte réglementaire, ce qui veut dire aussi engagement des politiques. Parce que quand on parle d'indépendance de l'agence, de financement de l'agence avec sa viabilité financière, de transparence des résultats des évaluations de mise en place d'activités de renforcement de compétences, tout cela doit être rendu obligatoire par des prises de textes réglementaires, c'est-à-dire des lois, c'est-à-dire des décrets signés par les plus hautes autorités, c'est-à-dire des arrêtés. Insérer la politique d'assurance qualité dans les textes qui réglementent l'enseignement supérieur. Parce que s'il n'y a pas d'obligation, les choses ne bougent pas vite. Les différents acteurs ne s'engagent pas. Ça rejoint notre discussion d'hier sur le fait qu'on a beau faire des renforcements de capacité, la valorisation de ces renforcements de capacité, leur mise en œuvre au sein des établissements ne se fera pas comme nous le souhaitons. Si je donne l'exemple du Sénégal, quand on a créé l'ANAQ-Sup, il y a maintenant 10 ans, il y a eu un bon texte réglementaire de l'agence qui a eu tout de suite son autonomie de décision et son autonomie financière, mais aussi son autonomie sur le personnel. C'est notre structure qui recrute son personnel par appel à candidature. Les choses avaient commencé à bouger parce qu'aussi au niveau du ministère, il y a eu un décret qui rendait obligatoirement l'assurance qualité dans les établissements. Cependant, c'est allé encore plus vite quand les textes, l'ensemble des textes de l'enseignement supérieur ont été repris par des décrets, par des arrêtés qui revoyaient l'ensemble des articles et y mettaient la dimension qualité. Ce qui responsabilisait tout de suite, en plus de l'agence, en plus du ministère, ce qui responsabilisait tout de suite les présidents d'université, ce qui responsabilisait tout de suite les doyens de facultés et directeurs du FR, ce qui responsabilisait même les chefs de département. Donc, je crois que toutes ces recommandations sont fort intéressantes, mais explicitement, il faudrait une action politique. Et cette action politique, c'est la prise de textes réglementaires qui fait que l'enseignant ne va pas dire « on me surcharge de nouveau ». Non, il saura que ça relève de sa responsabilité. Le recteur d'université saura que ça relève de sa responsabilité. Si c'est fait, je crois qu'il y aura une dynamique d'ensemble et l'ensemble de ces 5 points que vous avez cités pourra avancer. Quel que soit le pays, ça pourra avancer. Mais il faut des textes. Merci.
Je voudrais juste vous remercier parce que vous avez un peu décliné l'essentiel, particulièrement grâce à votre expérience, puisque l'agence sénégalaise est quand même une référence au niveau de l'Afrique francophone. Je suis, comme vous, à tort ou à raison, je suis persuadé que si ce que vous dites ne se fait pas, les agences feront du surplace. Je suis persuadé de ça et je prends toujours l'image très simple, et elle vaut ce qu'elle vaut, de dire qu'un train a besoin d'une locomotive. Prenez tous les wagons que vous voulez. Si vous n'avez pas une locomotive qui fait avancer, et là je vous rejoins concernant les textes et tout, l'autorité, et donc on ne pourra jamais avancer. Merci d'avoir dit ça puisqu'on en a parlé hier et j'espère qu'une grande majorité sera convaincue de ce que vous avez explicité il y a quelques instants. Merci à vous.
Many thanks for that reflection. It really struck home there, what you said, Lamine, because thinking of the environment I'm working in, I recently visited an agency, and Peter mentioned the issue of students on reviews. This agency has begun to be able to have students on reviews, but can't get students involved in its governance because the law doesn't allow it. And then there is frustration that the European standards are not being implemented fully, but the political situation in that country is not the responsibility of the agency. The agency can't change the law. It can only do what's within its remit. And similarly, the issue I think I mentioned in a speech the other day was the frustration that the European approach to joint programs isn't being implemented. Well, the principal reason it isn't being implemented is to do with the legal structures in different countries. And agencies working across borders can't change the law in another country. So I think that's really important. There was a colleague, I think, just here who wanted to speak. Yeah.
Merci. Merci pour la parole. Je suis Jean-Chrysostome Damancha de l'Université du Burundi. Vous avez dit que le rapport global sera publié. Moi, je suis en train de me demander comment il sera publié. Je crois que c'est un rapport qui est quand même confidentiel, qui sera adressé aux agences peut-être évaluées. À part cela, je me dis quand même que s'il y a moyen de garder la confidentialité, s'il y a moyen de rester confidentiel, peut-être dire et l'agence qui est évaluée A, B, C comme ça, moi je me dis quand même que le rapport est très très important pour les autres agences non évaluées, parce que toutes ces activités, je me dis que c'est pour l'amélioration de la qualité de l'enseignement supérieur. Alors je me dis que s'il y a moyen de rester confidentiel sans les nommer, je crois que ça serait important de nous envoyer ce rapport, la méthodologie que vous avez utilisée, et ça pourra aider finalement à aussi à nous montrer comment il faut s'auto-évaluer. Je vous remercie.
J'ai dit, je ne sais pas si j'ai utilisé le bon terme, j'ai dit publier, c'est-à-dire pour les parties prenantes et particulièrement les agences concernées. Ça ne sera pas publié pour le monde entier. Après, pour d'autres agences, ça c'est les porteurs du projet qui décideront à qui il sera envoyé. Mais en ce qui concerne les agences évaluées, forcément, c'est dans ce sens-là que j'ai dit publier. Merci.
And I think February, we're getting, Elizabeth already said the overview report is February. I think it's a really interesting question because if the reports of agencies are not published, do colleagues publish the reports of the institutions you review? Isn't there an issue here of trust and transparency amongst the stakeholders, the students, the governments, the employers? I'd be really interested to hear what the sort of views and practice on that are, because I certainly know from my own agency reviewing institutions, some of them don't like the reports being published and threaten to take us to court. Any other questions and comments? I wonder if we could come back to colleagues' thoughts on the issue Peter raised about students and reviews, because I led the change in QA in the UK about 15, 16 years ago in getting reviews. And the board member who spoke up most strongly for that, Peter, said, we use students on the reviews of the General Medical Council. They actually reviewed in medical reviews. So there are different perspectives. I'd be really interested if colleagues think what your reflections are on using students in your quality assurance procedures. Colleague here.
I am Baguma Abdallah, the president of the East African Higher Education Equality Assurance Network. So there are two things for me. One, they are actually involved in some instances. If, for instance, my experience with Rwanda, when I was at the Higher Education Council, before the review, you require a brief. Students prepare a brief to the audit team. And then second, they don't participate as members of the panel. Yeah? Then during the meetings, you also meet students. So I want to see how do we achieve, how do we achieve results through that approach? But also I personally agree that it's better we move ahead to see how they can participate. Of course, they should participate like they participate in the institutional leadership, for instance, during Senate. They participate, but when there are some items that they are not expected to be there, then they step aside, but they participate. So my own view is that it's better they participate. We instead find a way of of managing their participation. Thank you.
For the opportunity and good morning. Yes, I think this is one area where some institutions are doing very well, while others are not. But basically, students are the consumers and the custodians of whatever we are doing in the institutions, and would be highly unfair not to involve them in the process, because they also have quality issues which either enhance or compromise everything else that we are trying to do. I remember going to one country where the students, we had interviews with them, and the issues that came out there, you would realize you can't ignore them, and you want to hear them undiluted from the students themselves. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, or observations? Oh, sorry, I can't hear you. Oh, yes, sure. We have some. Do you know who is online? Cathy Ducas. Bonjour, Cathy. I can't see the screen, so I don't know if you need to unmute yourself, Cathy, or we can do it from the controls at the back of the room.
Do you hear me?
We can now, yes.
OK. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à tous. Cathy Ducas, je suis la directrice d'une agence qualité belge francophone et j'ai aussi l'immense honneur de travailler avec vous depuis 7 ans dans HAQAA1, HAQAA2. Et je voudrais vraiment remercier tous les organisateurs, mais aussi tous les acteurs de cette initiative HAQAA, parce que j'observe une immense, extraordinaire mobilisation sur le continent africain. Et je trouve que sur ces questions essentielles de développement économique, culturel, éducatif du continent, tout cela aura des retombées importantes qui bénéficieront à tous les continents. J'ai quelques commentaires à faire sur l'évaluation des agences et les visites d'appui. Comme Amine, j'ai eu le plaisir de participer à cette expérience et j'ai aussi, avec mon collègue Noël du Nigeria, fait un premier rapport sur HAQAA1 et les premières évaluations d'agences. Donc, nos remarques sont très convergentes et je voudrais vous apporter le témoignage, à mon humble avis, des bénéfices que peuvent avoir les évaluations d'agences et les retombées que ces évaluations peuvent avoir. Je pense qu'elles sont de deux ordres. Il y a un apport d'amélioration et un mécanisme d'amélioration pour les agences, avec une série de points de vigilance à travailler. Je suis tout à fait d'accord avec ce qui a été dit par mes collègues du Sénégal et d'autres pays, et Amine aussi, sur l'importance d'avoir un socle légal et des textes légaux qui permettent de travailler des questions. À la fois, ça donne une légitimité à la naissance d'une agence, parce que cette agence est prévue dans des textes, mais les mécanismes d'amélioration permettent ensuite de passer d'une légitimité décrétée, légale, à une légitimité reconnue par les parties prenantes, reconnue aussi et acquise au fil du temps et des activités. Donc la régularité des évaluations est un facteur important pour cela. Et au-delà de l'amélioration dans les pratiques, il y a aussi un levier politique au travers des différentes agences et au travers des différentes évaluations des mêmes agences. Cette régularité permet de pointer des choses qui doivent évoluer, et nous l'avons vu en Europe pour plusieurs pays et plusieurs situations où les rapports publics, alors ça touche la question de la publicité des rapports, les rapports sont publics, les rapports d'agence, et cela permet justement d'agir sur le levier politique. Alors, quels sont les points sur lesquels on peut améliorer? Les points de vigilance, et jamais rien n'est acquis et on doit toujours y travailler. Les points de vigilance sont repris dans les ASG, puisque ce sont les parties B et C qui nous guident et qui nous donnent des points précis. Il y a des points sur l'indépendance et l'autonomie de l'agence, donc cette capacité qu'elle a à faire des constats et à produire des recommandations, à mener des accréditations, à prendre des décisions. Il y a tout le volet des relations de l'agence avec ses parties prenantes. Il y a la question du professionnalisme, donc le développement de capacité des membres des personnels, avec toute cette dimension d'accompagnement des experts qui mènent les agences aussi. Ça fait partie du job des membres du personnel de bien former les experts pour qu'ils puissent faire un travail pertinent. Et il y a tout ce travail aussi sur la qualité des rapports qui sont publiés par les agences et qui doivent être accessibles et utiles. Et accessible, ça veut dire pas uniquement être sur un site où on peut trouver facilement le document, mais accessible aussi dans le langage et dans la manière dont ils sont rédigés. Si en plus les agences peuvent produire de temps à autre des études, des analyses, des compilations basées sur les résultats des évaluations, on contribue à une plus-value pour le secteur. Donc, je pense que cette publication, cette transparence est importante pour aider à faire cela. Et il me semble aussi que, du coup, il y a un enjeu capital au niveau du continent africain, c'est tout le soin à apporter pour la mise en place du dispositif d'agence continentale ou du mécanisme qui permettra l'évaluation régulière de ces agences, et qu'il y a évidemment là un besoin de construire une méthodologie solide qui apporte la confiance, qui donne aussi une information accessible aux utilisateurs et qui garantit une constance et une transparence dans le traitement des évaluations des agences. Donc tout ça me semble extrêmement porteur et bénéfique, et je me réjouis aussi de l'avancée des travaux que j'observe à distance ici maintenant, mais je suis vraiment de tout cœur avec vous et je salue d'ailleurs toutes les personnes que je connais dans l'Assemblée. Ça me fait plaisir de les dans l'Assemblée. Ça me fait plaisir de les revoir. Merci.
Thank you, Cathy. Actually, you remind us of a really important point there about the capacity of people, the capacity of the people in the agency, the capacity of the experts, and that's what HAQAA has been about developing the people. A colleague from UNESCO asked me a really good question yesterday. How many agencies has HAQAA established? That's not what HAQAA is for. HAQAA is about the person, the human capital, if you like, in the countries. It's for the governments and the institutions in the countries to establish their agencies. I just wondered, I mean, if there was one issue that we've been having some issues with in Europe, and I wonder if you found this in any of the agencies, it's on the issue of independence. So several years ago, the Kosovo government dismissed the entire board of the agency without any reason. Recently, the Polish agency, the government, the minister dismissed the president with no information, no reason. And it sort of feels like agencies should be accountable, but surely there should be a fair process so that they are not put under political pressure. Did you see any evidence of that being embedded really strongly, or any worries about independence?
Je pense qu'on a un terme dont on n'a pas parlé justement, c'est la redevabilité, accountability, effectivement, qui est un élément essentiel pour tous les acteurs de l'assurance qualité, qu'elles soient internes ou externes, et aussi par rapport aux responsables des institutions.
Well, I think we have to move now to our keynote speaker. Is that right? I'm looking for the organisers. So just and I know Peter wanted to come back in, but maybe we can find another way to keep the discussion going. Colleague wanted to just sum up a few themes that I think came out through that discussion. Thank you for our wonderful contributor. And I think we raised enough points to generate a really good discussion. Thank you to all the colleagues who contributed. There was several contributions there about the importance of students, maybe different views and how we get involved, but Professor Johansen, my good friend from Egypt yesterday, reminded us, we're doing this all about the students, aren't we? This is all about making sure students get a good degree. We heard about a real diversity of stages of development, agencies working at different speeds, at different stages of where they are. We've heard some quality control issues around project delays, and we'll get on top of that. And a real sense of the beginning of a momentum. But you raised our opening contribution, raised a really, really important point about sustainability. Because this doesn't stop. We have to keep on doing. We have to build the people. We have to build the experts. We have to build confidence in the agencies. So I think that's all really important. And of course, we were reminded right at the end. This is all about accountability, of course, accountability of institutions to their stakeholders, for public funds, for student fees, but also accountability of agencies to know that your job is trustworthy and delivering for your country and your people and your students. So unless you wanted to say any final remarks, we'll close. No? He's thinking. You switched off.
Si j'ai une phrase à dire, ou quelques mots, c'est que l'assurance qualité ne doit pas être centrée juste sur des référentiels, mais c'est un processus d'amélioration continue et c'est une culture. Si vous intégrez cette amélioration continue dans votre culture, je pense que c'est là la meilleure définition de la qualité, qui dépasse le cadre des référentiels. Voilà ce que je voulais dire. Je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention, pour nous avoir écoutés. Je remercie Monsieur le Président qui a trop bien animé cette séance.
And now over to, I don't know who's, we have our wonderful host.
Thank you so much, Mr. Douglas, for chairing this session, and also thank you, Mr. Amin Lalal, to present a brief of what transpired during the evaluation. So now the next session will be the keynote that will be delivered by Fred Swanika. Hope now, is he online? Not yet. Okay, give us a few minutes. We are trying to contact him. And this session will be chaired by Ms. Elizabeth Colucci. So you're welcome, Ms. Elizabeth.
Good morning again, colleagues. As we wait for Fred to connect, I'll just say a few introductory words regarding the purpose of this keynote. I have to apologize for my voice. It seems to be leaving me. It's been a long year with lots of hard work, and I think it's taken the toll on my vocal cords. We decided to offer you a keynote this morning from someone outside of this community, but committed to leadership in the higher education sector in Africa. I think sometimes in the quality assurance community, we tend to be a little bit insular. It is a very technical topic that generates technical discussions. And sometimes we fail to communicate the wider purpose of what we're doing in quality assurance. And so the idea of this keynote was to ask someone who's engaged in university leadership and management to look in at what we're discussing here, to reflect, and to provide his respective vision for transforming the African continent through higher education leadership. I'll say a few words about Fred Swanika. He is actually a Ghanaian national. He's deeply passionate about Africa and believes that the missing ingredient on the continent is good leadership. In line with this, he has founded the African Leadership Group that aims to catalyze a new generation of ethical, entrepreneurial African leaders. The group comprises the African Leadership Academy, the African Leadership University, ALX, and The Room. In recognition of his work in developing Africa's future leaders, Fred was selected as one of 115 young leaders to meet President Obama, former US president, in the first ever President's Forum for Young African Leaders held in the White House in 2010. He has been recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum and was listed by Forbes magazine among the top 10 power men, quote unquote, in Africa in 2011. Fred was also recognized by Echoing Green as one of 15 best emerging social entrepreneurs in the world. He was in 2009 a TED Fellow and is a fellow of the Aspen Institute's Global Leadership Network. Is Fred with us yet online? He's here, wonderful. So Fred, we're delighted to listen to you speak this morning. We have a very committed group of higher education leaders working in both the government and the university sector from across the continent, from 5 African regions. So we look forward to hearing your inspirational words today. Fred, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Thank you for having me in your conversation today. I hope the conference so far has been going well. And I applaud the aims that you've set out to achieve, the partnership between the African Union and the European Union to really think about how do we harmonize in accreditation and also quality assurance in the African continent. I think this is something that I personally believe is critical to the future of Africa. I think that if this group is able to bring together some of the aims of the AU's continental education strategy for Africa, the impact will be really phenomenal for the continent. And especially given, we stand at a critical moment as we think about how do we move forward post-COVID to really ensure that we are able to really build out higher education system that is fit for purpose and that can actually really allow Africa to achieve its fullest potential. I think it's also you're meeting an interesting time when initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement have been, signed, and now it's time to make that vision a reality. And I think the mobility of people. I was with President Kagame last week in Rwanda, and one of the things, with the group I was with, asked him a question about what he saw as success from the free trade, African Free Trade Continental Agreement. And he said one of the things that he would see as success is the mobility of human capital, African people being able to move across the continent and to be able to contribute their talents to the development of the country, of the continent. And I think one of the things that is going to be critical for that is obviously harmonization of higher education and accreditation standards so that, African professionals can move around and to be able to really contribute to drive trade and regional integration and all these benefits we talk about. So the work that you're doing, I think, is critical. So today, I want to talk a bit about innovation, and why, and the role that I think that higher education and quality assurance can play in driving innovation. We live in a very interesting time on a continent where we, which is quite unique. And obviously, this continent of Africa that we all love is a continent that has a lot of challenges, and with those challenges come great opportunities. I'm going to share a few slides. Can you all see my screen? Yeah. Okay. So, why does this matter? Why does it matter that we think about innovation, and why does it matter that we think about innovation, particularly in the higher education space? One of the things that over the years, as I've worked on the African content and that we believe in the African Leadership Group, is that Africa has very unique context and very unique situation. We have 500 million young people on this continent that are between the ages of 16 and 24. And we are the youngest continent in the world. The average age of an African, as you know, is 19, compared to the average age of a German or Japanese, which is 48, 49. I know they're members of the European Union that are here. And in the US, the average age, I think, is about 36, 37. China is aging. India is aging. Africa remains the youngest continent in the world. By the end of the century, Africa is going to be 40% of the world's population. So this means that this century is going to be the African century. Where Africa goes is going to determine where the world goes. Because if you're talking about where 40% of the world's population live, then the outcomes for that population is going to determine outcomes for humanity in this century. And when we look at this continent that we live in, we in the African Leadership Group, as we develop leaders, we challenge them to become problem solvers. And through the work that we've done, we've identified what we call the 7 grand challenges facing Africa. These are big, big challenges that we have to solve in this continent. Urbanization. 800 million people are going to move into African cities in the next 40 years. That's going to create all kinds of challenges around low-cost housing, traffic, urban infrastructure, and so forth around cities, right? Education. I've talked about it already. I shared some of the statistics. We need to think about how do we radically the largest workforce in the world in 15 years, right? By 2035, we'll have the largest workforce. Actually, now it's 13 years because that 15 years was in 2020. Today, 13 years time, we're going to have the largest workforce in the world. A workforce larger than China, larger than India. So that means we do not have much time to educate this young population that we have. Infrastructure is another big challenge. We don't have enough electricity, internet access, roads, rails, all the things that are taken for granted. Also, healthcare, as we see the COVID pandemic, is a big challenge. Climate change, we contribute the least to climate change in the world, yet we are going to be faced with some of the greatest impacts of climate change. Governance, we all know about the challenges of the public sector in the continent. And of course, job creation. How to create jobs for this 1 billion youth that will need jobs by 2035. These are big challenges that, as we think about higher education, we need to think about how do we contextualize that higher education to prepare young leaders, young people on this continent to solve these problems that we will face in this century. And then we have another list of what we call the 7 great opportunities, which are, let's call it the low-hanging fruit, where Africa has been blessed with unusual competitive advantages that we haven't fully captured yet. These are things like agriculture. We have abundant rain, abundant sunshine, 40% of the world's arable land. We have the most arable land in the world, in the continent. And we have, but yet today we spend $50 billion a year importing food into Africa that we have perfect conditions to grow. There's a huge opportunity to create income for our continent and to create wealth. We should be the world's breadbasket, given the resources, the natural resources that we have, and how blessed we are with agriculture. But yet the average smallholder farmer today is 60 years old, and young people are not going into agriculture. How do we make agriculture and agribusiness a career that is sexy and attractive to young people, so that we think about agri-tech and processing and supply chain and logistics, all the things that young people are excited about, and that can really help to bring the promise of agriculture to the continent, so that we no longer have to beg for food aid, but that we can actually, produce our own food and export it and create wealth on the continent. Natural resources, we're blessed with gold and diamonds and minerals and all these things, but yet today, we don't process this, we extract very little value from this because, again, we're not innovating. Apple cannot make its phones without cobalt from the DRC, without coltan from the DRC. Tesla cannot make its cars without cobalt from the DRC. Yet Africa gets a fraction of the value from this. Ghana and Ivory Coast make 70% of the world's cocoa, but we don't have any global chocolate brands from Africa, right? And again, this is a huge untapped opportunity. Arts, culture, design. another great opportunity as the world requires more content and creativity. And the good thing about that is that it doesn't require much capital to be competitive. We're seeing what the Nigerian musicians are showing us in this space as they're going global and really putting Africa on the map. Huge opportunity there, film and so forth. Tourism is a big opportunity to create work on this continent as well. Wildlife conservation, we have the unique assets in that space. Again, how do we build a wildlife economy around that, right? Regional integration, bring our countries together, we talked about it. And finally, women's empowerment, right? How do we get 50% of our world's the population to contribute as much, their fullest potential. So these challenges and opportunities are unique to Africa. And so when we looked at developing the continent, and as we think about the work that we're doing, as you think about the work that you're doing to regulate the higher education sector, I want you to put this list on the table so that you think about the task at hand for higher education institutions on the continent, which I ultimately believe is to produce problem solvers and innovators who will solve these challenges and capture these opportunities for the continent. Because higher education is often the most expensive investment that countries make in the human capital. It's in Africa today, as you know, tertiary enrollment rates are only between 8 to 10% on the continent. Sometimes it's 12%, depending on whether they count North Africa or not. And in the 30% in India, China, and compared to 60 to 80% in the West. So we're investing limited resources in few people who can get access to higher education in Africa. Those people should not be doing easy things. They should not be solving small problems because they're the elite of society. And we're spending a lot of money as nations to develop the capabilities of this very small fraction of people that get to higher education in Africa. I believe that the only way we can justify the privilege that those few people get is by producing people who will solve these big problems for Africa and who will radically innovate and drive the continent forward. Now, in that context, one of the things that I believe, as we look at the many challenges that we face when we think about higher education, if we were to do things the conventional way, we will never be able to really address these problems, right? Because how do you create a world-class university in the traditional way? I just joined the board of the Rhodes Trust, which is the entity that provides the Rhodes Scholarship from Oxford University. And whenever I'm there for board meetings, I'm reminded about how old Oxford is. It's 1,000 years old, right? They started the institution 1,000 years old. So if you wanted to build a university on the caliber of Oxford, you need 1,000 years, right, to get to build an Oxford. You need thousands of professors with PhDs, and you need billions of dollars. Now, we don't have any of those things in Africa. We don't have 1,000 years. We've got 15 years, as I mentioned, or 13 years before we have the world's largest workforce. We don't have thousands of professors with PhDs. We have very few that are coming out of our institutions. We don't have billions or trillions of dollars, right? We're cash strapped as a continent. So when you think about that, and you look at these challenges and opportunities that we face, one of the things that I really believe is that constraints drive innovation. When you have a lot of constraints like we do, you can't do things a conventional way. You need to reimagine, you need to reinvent. And so it means not just copying best practice, right? Too often we're told copy best practice. Bring what is done in the rest of the world to Africa. What I believe we need is new practice. We have to set the standards which will actually lead the world. What do I mean by that? I believe that the rest of the world's standards are actually too low for us. And by analogy, I want to use that. Imagine that if you're on a racetrack and you're behind another car, like here, this is the racetrack of the world. Africa is behind the rest of the world, right? We're poorer than the rest of the world. We're less developed, et cetera, et cetera. If you're on this racetrack and you're using the same vehicle, you'll never catch up. We will never catch up to the rest of the world if we go at the same speed as the rest of the world. So that's what I mean that the rest of the world standards are too low for Africa. We need to set higher standards if we want to have a chance of catching up. We need to reinvent and reimagine, not simply copy the rest of the world and bring it to Africa, what we need is new practice, not best practice. So best practice would say, wait 1,000 years to build an Oxford. Slowly build research universities, get thousands of professors with PhDs. We don't have 1,000 years. Best practice would say, build a university system that is built around professors. We don't have thousands of professors. We need to think differently and say, how do you leverage different ways of learning? What we have in abundance in Africa is students, young people. How do they teach themselves? How do they learn from each other using peer learning, leveraging technology, and so forth to reimagine how education happens? How do you rethink infrastructure, which we don't have, et cetera, right? So if the rest of the world is using a car, we need a rocket ship. If they're using a canoe, we need a speedboat. If they're using a helicopter, we need a space shuttle. Because that's the only way we're going to catch up. Otherwise, we'll always be behind the rest of the world. And as you set your standards, this is what I want to challenge all of you to think differently about. Because otherwise, we'll always be left behind and we'll never catch up the rest of the world. Right? So now, obviously, as we think about the solution, technology is going to play a very key role in that. Right? If we look at what we need to do in the limited time that we have, we don't, with the limited resource that we have, right? There are many, many advantages that technology has, right? Technology allows us to access content from the world's best universities in one place. I went to Stanford University for my MBA, and I went to Macalester College in the US for my undergraduate degree. And Stanford at the time was rated as the #2 business school in the world. And Macalester was rated in the top 25 liberal arts colleges in the US. And I can honestly tell you that in both places, I think I had 30 professors at Stanford and about 40 professors at Macalester. I can only remember 3 that were really brilliant professors in both institutions. But I was forced to take all my curriculum from those institutions. Why is that the case? Imagine a situation where a young person in Africa, thanks to technology, can access the best 3 professors from Stanford, the best 3 from MIT, the best 3 from Oxford, the best 3 from University of Cape Town, the best 3 from Makerere University, the best from university in Singapore, and curate all the curriculum in one place. Then you get the best of the best. You're not restricted to just those 3 great ones at your university. That's what technology allows you to do. And you can access this information, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, someone doing a PhD at Cambridge or Oxford or MIT or whatever had access to less information than a child today in Africa has on their mobile phone. I remember to get research, I would have to go to the library and use microfiche. So many of you remember that. You get this tape, this film, you put it on a overhead projector and you put it on the screen, and that's how you do your research. Today, a child mobile in Africa can get access to the world's best libraries in an instant. And we have this unique opportunity to reimagine things. And so the big failure, I believe, for higher education regulation in Africa would be to not capture these opportunities and to do things the traditional way that is being done in the rest of the world. Because we do not have the same context as the rest of the world. We do not have the same resources. We need to reimagine, reinvent. And as I've said, set higher standards, new practice, not best practice. So, technology, as I've mentioned, would be a key, would play a key role in this, right? And I hope that all of you are going to spend a lot of time thinking about what technology can do today to improve access to education and to improve the quality of it, right? What are some things that technology does? Technology allows personalization, right? Just like you see in things like Netflix and Spotify, you can leverage data science and technology to really drive personalized education, tailor around a student's development to a level of precision and accuracy that we can never do before. Technology allows scale, right? Some of you may know of Salman Khan, who teaches 100 million users per year. So David Malan from Harvard, CS15 course. Harvard's most attended in-person and online class with over 30 million viewers, right? And we need scale in Africa very quickly because we don't have time. Technology is one of the few things where quality and cost actually get better with scale, right? If you look at this So in the year 2000, it cost you $18 to get a CD, an album. Today, you get 60 million songs. You'll get maybe 10 songs or 15 songs on your album for $18. Today, you can get 60 million songs for $9.99 on Spotify, right? Or you can get the free subscription for 10 million songs or whatever, right? A computer, 1985, cost $95,000. Today, you can get a laptop for $400. And it's much better today than it was then, right? Same thing with cellular phones and so forth. Technology is the only thing that, as you improve the quality, increase the scale, the quality actually gets better, not worse, right? Because you have data that can allow you to improve the experience and so forth, right? Finally, technology allows you to track performance, right? With data science and analytics, you can actually see outcomes at the student level, at the country level, at the school level, at the global level. And so one of my challenges to all of you as regulators is to get very smart with technology, because your job is to track performance, to track outcomes. And one of the best ways to do that is a higher education system that is built around technology, because you can actually track exactly what's going on. You can see which students are learning. You can see the outcomes. You can track the engagement rates. You have intelligence about, what is being, aspects of the curriculum which are not through assessments. And these are some of the standards that I think will allow us to leapfrog and to create new standards for the world. Because as we all know, higher education is one of the sectors that has been most resistant to innovation and change, right? And but yet we cannot afford to do things the traditional way. We have to reinvent. So what would a higher education, so one thing I've mentioned is about leveraging technology, right? And that's one thing that I think, as you set your standards and think about quality assurance, I would encourage you to. Another that I would encourage you to think about is the way in which you look at inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes. Today, a lot of higher education is based on inputs. So what do I mean by this? If you think about any production system, you have inputs. You have, for example, if you're making bread, inputs would be yeast and wheat. These are some ingredients that you need, right? Then you have activities, which is the baking of that bread, right? Then that leads to outputs, which is bread itself. Right? Finally, you have outcomes, which is something that maybe creates value when the bread is sold by the bakery. And then finally, you have impact, which is a greater, societal outcome. Like, in this case, people are fed, they're not hungry, and you have, less malnutrition and so forth. This is what a system would look like. Today, most higher education is focused here at inputs and activities. How many professors do you have? How many library books do you have? How much to become a university in certain countries, you need 100 acres of land to be considered a university. Otherwise, you're not a university. You need, in some cases, the director's office must be 10 meters wide by 5 meters long. These are inputs and activities, but what is not being tracked is outcomes and impact. Are they producing graduates who are employable? How much income do these graduates earn compared to other universities? How many innovations are coming out of your university? How many lives are being touched by the innovations that are produced by your graduates? Which of these challenges and opportunities in Africa are being solved by your graduates? What do employers say about your graduates? How are they doing in terms of winning prestigious awards globally, like the Schwarzman scholarships and Rhodes scholarships and so forth, right? These are the outcomes and impact that I believe will be far more impactful on the continent, and that we should hold universities and higher education institutions accountable to, rather than today most higher education regulation is focused on inputs and activities. And I would love to see a higher education system, Africa to be the first to develop a higher education system that is not based on inputs and activities, but based on outputs and outcomes. That would be new practice, not best practice. And you would set a new benchmark for what really matters. And that could truly be transformative for the continent of Africa, right? We in the African Leadership Group hold ourselves accountable to our outcomes and impact, not only to input and activities. And some of the results that we're seeing are because of that. So if our research shows that it typically takes most university graduates in Africa, it takes them 5 years to get a job. At ALU, we typically find that about, in our last recent survey of our alumni that we did, 93% of our graduates had found a job before they graduated. If you look at, also track the outcomes from employers. When we put them into internships, when we put them into jobs, they rate them 4.5 out of 5. 97% of people who come out, employers who take an intern from African Leadership University, ask for another one. 97% of employers. And ALU graduates typically earn 4 times the salaries of other African graduates. And they win prestigious scholarships like the Schwarzman scholarships, the Rhodes scholarships. They're going to graduate schools like Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, MIT, and so forth. And they're not only working at any companies, they're working at the most competitive companies in the world. And this is some of the outcomes that we're tracking and that we hold us accountable. 2 years ago, we entered into a large partnership with the MasterCard Foundation to, leverage the work that we're doing in higher education to bring about and to create work opportunities for 2 million young people in Africa. And so to show you what I mentioned data science and how data can allow us to track quality and impact and so forth. And I want to show you the power of data science. What we have built in the African Leadership Group is an infrastructure that allows us to collect this data about how we're doing towards our goal of creating 2 million work opportunities for young people in Africa by 2030. And because of the technology that we've built, we're able to track, for example, this year, we had a goal of enabling 40,000 young people to find work. We have already exceeded that goal, and we have hit 51,000 youth in work opportunities cumulatively. And this is how much we created just in 2022. We're able to track how many jobs are being created by African Leadership University Academy, African Leadership University, and ALX, which is a program that develops, software engineers and data scientists and so forth in an unaccredited setting. And you can see the jobs that are being created by different institutions. We can see a heat map of exactly where these jobs are being created. We can click on this heat map and get 60 data points about every young person in Africa that is going through our training institutions. Where are they based? How much are they earning? How many people in their families do they support? What is their gender, et cetera, et cetera. We have data on all these 60 data points on every single person. And you can see by day where our graduates are getting jobs and those who are creating their own ventures. Every single day we can see. This is just what happened yesterday, right? You can see what's happening by the day. And then when we go in here, we can look at the training that they're having. We can see how many people have been enrolled on institutions, how they've graduated and so forth. And we can see how that is happening. We look at employment statistics. How many are employed? We get data about how many of them rate the quality of their work as dignified and fulfilling, the gender, the placement rates by institution within 6 months, the feedback from employers about ALA students, alumni, ALU, and ALX. We can even track the income that they're earning. So we can see, for example, typically, young women are paid less. Well, across the world, women earn less than men. But at ALU, our graduates are earning more than the men, right? The average income, $12,000 a year versus $11,000 for men, which is phenomenal. But at ALX, we're seeing that we have a problem where we still have the women being paid less than men. So we know we have to fix this issue. This insight is what is driving our quality and improvements all the time. We look at entrepreneurship from our grads and we can see how many, we've developed 5,000 entrepreneurs, how many jobs have they created, and how much capital have they raised and so forth. How much have they contributed to Africa's GDP? So this is what quality assurance that based on outputs and impact would look like, where you're holding institutions available, accountable to what they're producing and how the quality of their graduates and how they're changing, the continent and solving those challenges and opportunities, instead of simply holding them accountable to the amount of land that they have, how many library books they have, or the size of the director's office and so forth, which today too much higher education is focused on. So I'll end by really a challenge to all of you. You are living in a unique time in Africa's history, where as higher education institutions, regulators, you have the chance to reshape the trajectory of an entire continent by shaping the outcomes that the institutions that are producing the human capital that are going to solve these problems for the continent, who are going to go into government, who are going to be leaders of society, shaping the quality, what these young people do. Today, 50% of college graduates in Africa are unemployed. It takes them 5 years to get a job, and then, et cetera, et cetera. They're not producing the innovations that we need. They're not, and so the question and challenge I want to leave with all of you is, how do you want to be remembered? When history is written 50 years from now, and they ask, what happened in Africa when they had these opportunities? They had this incredible youth population. And there were institutions that were set up to develop this human capital on the continent. And there were regulators who were managing the quality of the institutions. What did you do with your time on this earth? How do you want to be remembered? And that's the challenge that I want to ask all of you. Do you want to be remembered as those who drove new standards, who drove innovation and set new practice that set a standard not just for Africa but for the world? And in a generation, and in this, you were able to produce a whole new generation of human capital that transformed the continent? Or do you want to be remembered as those who upheld tradition and copied best practice from the rest of the world, and nothing changed on the continent? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred. I think you raised a number of really critical issues and highlighted a number of very important opportunities, ranging from the youth population in Africa to technology, to the notion that we should be creating new practice and not just copying best practice. If you allow, Fred, we would like to perhaps take a few comments or reactions from the audience. Would that be possible?
Yes, absolutely fine.
Excellent. Okay. I see Peter has a hand up, and then we'll come over here afterwards. Peter, go ahead.
Very much, our keynote presenter. Two questions that you raised pierced my heart. The first is, how do I, Peter Okebukola from Nigeria, want to be remembered 10 years, 20 years from now, when the fortunes of Africa have changed for the better or for worse? The second, how do we catch up? In the League of Continents, on several development indicators, Africa is way behind. And you pose the question, how do we catch up? And you answer the question yourself. That to catch up, we've got to be exponential in our rate of impact, our rate of doing things. You underlined the importance of technology. I've had this said too many times. I agree with you, yes, but I've had it said, the same old story we've been hearing. You talked about human resources. I'm happy to let you know that Africa is not bereft of quality human resources. Seated here in Accra, in this room, in Alisa Hotel, are the best brains, among the best brains in the world, not only in Africa. Nigeria, my country, has 17,000 full professors, globally renowned Go to any country in the world, especially the US and the UK. You find Nigerian engineers, doctors, find engineers, doctors, all these professionals from different countries of Africa. So we're not short. You mentioned that we're short of. No, we're not. We are hugely endowed. If you, in Nigeria, for instance, we have documented the full professors. If you just Google full professors in Nigerian university system, you find it there. We're just finalizing. We will mean National Universities Commission, finalizing the one for 2021. But what I consider to be the big failure, which organization is taking on headlong, but which you didn't mention, we are talking about other big failures, is the failure of our leaders at all levels. I'm not going to talk about leadership, president. No, I'm talking about every level, private sector, public sector. I'm talking about technology. In the university system, you have the head of the department. The head of the department has failed. The dean of faculty has failed. I'm not talking generically, but I'm saying that at every level of leadership, we have failed. And that is why the Association of African Universities is now, is coming with a new vibrancy to ensure that all that we have said, all these questions you asked, at our own microcosm of the entire firmament, to be able to do something quite good. What I would like to propose, which I also didn't find in your presentation, is we should celebrate good practices. You did very well, and I love your presentation, but you did not celebrate good practices. There are several good practices happening now in Africa that your organization has been documenting. So what I think we must do is to have maybe a database or a compendium or something of good practices in how technology can be used to leverage several things. So again, I thank you for your very insightful keynote address, and we wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. And perhaps before Fred responds, let's take a few more comments from the floor. We had one here, sir. Please go ahead.
My name is Emmanuel Ongara. I'm an independent researcher and leadership training specialist based in Pretoria, South Africa. I listened to Fred, and I said, here is somebody who is speaking the language that we should all be speaking. It is generally agreed by many higher education specialists that higher education in Africa has failed. Because when universities were first set up, the hope was that the graduates from universities would help Africa to develop, would help their own countries to develop. And higher education in Africa has not quite achieved this. And in terms of the quality of higher education, we know that we are not performing as well as higher education institutions in other parts of the world. Now, I have just written a book in which I've said, what is important, two disciplines that are important for the future of Africa and indeed for the future of the world are leadership and education. That we bring together the discipline of leadership and the discipline of education to develop a new kind of leader who is properly educated and who knows what leadership is about. One of the things that we do is to blame our leaders for their failures. But what we fail to do is to see that those leaders, the majority of them are products of our higher education institutions. So what is needed is to develop a new kind of leader who understands what leadership is about and what kind of higher education will bring about the transformation that Africa needs. In terms of outcomes, we need graduates who not only are able to be employable, but who are also able to create employment for others. Now, we have as a problem as quality assurance people, we have a problem of convincing people the importance of quality assurance. And I would say one of the ways of convincing university leaders and even government leaders about the importance of quality assurance is to make them understand the failure that we in higher education have gone through, and that one way, one significant way of redressing the situation is quality assurance. Quality assurance should not just be an industry that gives people jobs and positions, but an industry that is intended to transform the higher education system of the continent so that the higher education system can also transform the continent. And I would like to thank Fred Swanika for his keynote speech, and to say, as quality assurance people looking at the transformation of African higher education, one of the things that we should think about is the role of leadership, how leadership should be used in higher education systems in order to help us transform the continent.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. I think you've captured that beautifully. Time is not with us. I would like to take these two last comments. Please keep it quite short, and then we'll let Fred respond, and then we'll close. So I see Ben in the back, and then we'll come back to was that Moni? Yes. And then we'll cut it there. Go ahead, Ben.
Thank you very much. Ben speaking. Thank you, Fred, for the keynote, and thank you for the very good opportunity to discuss about the inputs of what makes education better. My humble observation is that education have not failed, but the whole ecosystem of the world decision-making is not integrating or embracing the diffusion theory of the inputs. In your presentation, much as I like the input activities, we always forget to focus on the business processes and the one which creates the ecosystem of misalignment, understanding, or taking the details. My humble submission to this. Reference to some of different studies, among which I worked on the diffusion of education, on higher education information system. There is a need always to talk about re-engineering the business process of the decision makers for education. Much as we talk that education gets investment, I think, and we could confirm by studies, that education have not took much investment, but education have got much destruction of everybody expecting to get output from education while he doesn't consider the process. The decision-making for education, if they don't take in consideration or external, institutional, and the so-called policy, it will always remain in the complaint. I submit. The rest I can share on that research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. And Moni, for our last comment, please.
Okay, thanks, Fred. There's just a lot of food for thought in what you have said, and I think you've provoked some thinking, deeper thinking. There's many things that I agree with. I think it's important to focus on input as well as the output and outcomes and impact. I think we focus on the input because it's easier to measure. And maybe we need to think more carefully about how do we measure impact if 50% of the youth are unemployed? You know, what do we do? There's a time lag. If 5 years later they get jobs, etc. I also think that we must not be insensitive to our colonial history and where we come from, because I think we've done extremely well as a continent and with first generation university students. I think we've really achieved a lot and we mustn't put ourselves down. But there's something you said, and maybe we can pick it up in our conversation later, of something that I'm grappling with. As an educationist, we've been taught about how to structure programs, about how to have a progression of knowledge, starting from your first year, your second year, your third year, etc. And we know that currently the industries are actually setting up their own learning academies and doing just-in-time training. And you've also suggested that by saying we can pick up courses along the way from the best institutions. And I want to be open to thinking about whether the problem in this new world, in this new reality, is not because we are stuck in traditional paradigms of how knowledge is created, and whether there are opportunities for us to think afresh. Because what we know is that knowledge is not just about information, and it's about those attitudes and values. So for example, I'm from South Africa. Elon Musk comes from the same city that I come from, but he's a creator of employment. But does he have the attitudes and the values, etc., that we want to see for the rest of the people in my country? So I think you've just provided a lot of thought and a food for thought, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Moni. Fred, would you like to respond before we close the session?
Yes, thank you very much to colleagues for your excellent contributions and comments. Let me share a few reactions. I think maybe starting first with the last contribution. I think it was from Monique from South Africa. I can do more that. It's actually linked to some of the comments that were made by the first and second contributor as well around leadership and the leadership education. And when you mention how, you know, and Elon Musk has been created, and yes, he's creating jobs, but does he have the attitudes and the values that would make you proud to be a South African? And maybe that's questionable. But I completely agree with you that we need to think more broadly about the purpose of education. Education should not be about memorizing facts and figures. It's about producing someone who's going to be useful to society, who's going to be a problem solver, an innovator, and someone who's a thinker, a critical thinker, and someone who can really, you know, help to drive change in society, right? And so, yes, I completely agree with you that. And this is one place where you as regulators and as quality assurance professionals can really drive change in society by holding universities and higher education accountable to infusing, you know, values into the education and ethics and leadership training, so that it's as important to have a curriculum on that and to have practice and you know, and research, for example, from the Center for Creative Leadership shows that leadership is not learned only in the classroom. When you ask leaders, they've done research to see how did they develop as leaders, they attribute only 10% of their learning to classroom learning. They attribute 20% to what they learn from their peers and mentors and coaches, what they call developmental relationships. And 70% of their growth as leaders comes from practice. They learn best by doing. So experiential education, getting people to go into the communities to serve and to practice being, you know, starting small organizations and working in teams and launching ventures. And how do you hold universities accountable to create those experiential learning opportunities to get people to do it? And that these kinds of learnings is where they get to develop their leadership skills more than just in the classroom, right? But are you holding universities accountable to that as you look at their curriculum design? Do you today credit is typically driven only by seating in the classroom, credit hours, the whole credit hour system. They don't, and a lot of higher education regulations do not give credit for experiential learning and learning outside the classroom. How do we rethink that so that we can actually get some of these outcomes that we're talking about, right? One of the colleagues also talked about getting universities to understand the importance of quality and to appreciate quality assurance. I would posit that most universities want quality assurance. They want to know that what they're doing is good. They want an external benchmark of reference, right? It actually becomes a competitive advantage for them to be able to say, hey, we are rated highly versus others, right? And it helps them to attract students and so forth. So most universities actually appreciate the importance of it. What I'm challenging you to think about is that, can you use this incredible influence that you have to drive different outcomes? Because clearly the outcome that we have now is not working. If it was, we would be a prosperous continent. We would be like Korea. Nigeria graduate, when 50 years ago, 60 years ago, Nigeria was more wealthy than South Korea. Same, they're both been colonized and so forth. Today we sit and we're behind the rest of the world. So the model we have is clearly hasn't been working. So while I agree that we need to celebrate some of the successes that we have, we also need to be honest about where we are falling short and not rest on our laurels and think we have gotten it right, and really challenge the status quo and develop a model that is going to finally get us to leapfrog and move like a rocket, because we don't have a choice. And so I agree completely that for society to develop, you need a combination of leadership and education. And if you don't have leadership, you can educate people all that you want, and you won't have the outcomes that you. And there's so many examples of, if you look at what has happened in Zimbabwe, wonderful education system. I'm a product of, I went to school there for 4 years, but challenge of leadership, and they haven't made much traction compared to, say, Rwanda, where you've got excellent leadership, and due to the genocide and so forth, they've had challenges with the education system, but the country is moving much more forward. Right? So we do need to have this combination, and so ethics in entrepreneurship needs to be infused into education and into higher education, and you have the chance to actually shape that and insist that universities embed ethics training into their curriculum and hold people accountable and have them do experiential, because then that will produce the leaders that our colleague was mentioning that we need today to really move the country forward. I really want to thank you for having me today. And thank you for your comments, and thank you for engaging. And again, appreciate the work that you do in trying to improve the standards of higher education on the continent, and really recognize that the continent's future in many ways lies in your hands. What you are able to do to transform higher education on this continent, because it's a few people who need to transform Africa, a few amazing leaders who understand that leadership is about solving problems of society and serving others, not just enriching themselves. Who are going to come out of these universities, who are going to go out into our organizations, who are going to go into government, who are going to become entrepreneurs or not. These are the people who will shape what Africa becomes in this century. And you are sitting in a unique vantage point to make sure that when it's going to be an African century, whether we like it or not, the only question is it going to be a good century or a bad century? And you have the opportunity to make sure it's a good century. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fred, from the entire group. We really appreciated your inspirational words. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us. And we wish you were here with us physically as well. Okay, everyone, I think we'll close. We're a little bit behind schedule, but I think it was worth it. And if Juru agrees, we'll try to start again at 1:15 the hour. Is that okay? Okay, so we'll break for coffee now.
Hello, one more announcement. We would like to remind those who traveled to please remember to give the boarding passes to the registration desk.